In this video, I'm going to give you my top 5 tips for building a deer fence that's affordable, that'll last, that'll really work to keep the deer out. And I'll share with you the mistakes that I made. And in the end, I'll give you the cost breakdown and some time-saving tips as well as some bonus tips to keep deer out of your garden. Tip number 1 is to pick a deer fence that deer can't go through. So right here, see that? That was the deer pushing up against this deer fence just with the weight of their body, breaking it and pushing through. So this deer fence was the Tenax 2A040006 on Amazon. It's got a 240-pound tensile strength, which seems like a lot, but not nearly enough. So the bottom line is, don't buy that one off of Amazon. There's all kinds of good reviews, but you've got to get one that says 600 pounds break strength at a minimum, and you have to get that on the spec sheet. Sometimes they'll say it in the description on the various websites, but make sure it's a minimum of 600 pounds. Tip number 2 is to make it impossible for the deer to go under your fence. A lot of the deer fencing that you'll see comes with stakes. I wouldn't recommend using the stakes. What we've done is we've just gathered a bunch of old logs around the property, and we've taken some old trim pieces that we had and then just screwed the trim through the deer fencing onto the log, and now the deer can't possibly move this log to get under it. If you're seeing this chicken wire here, that would take us back to tip number 1, make it so that they can't go through. So since we bought this cheaper deer fencing, we didn't want to throw it out, and we needed to be done with it, and so we added a layer of chicken wire, which then they couldn't push through the bottom. So if you're having a challenge with that, you can add a layer of chicken wire to the top 3 feet, or the bottom 3 feet, then they can't go through that. So if you're finding this information valuable so far, please hit the like button and comment below. So tip number 3 is to make it so that they can't jump over. Now that's pretty obvious with deer fencing, but you'll see deer fencing sold in 6-foot and even 4-foot heights. You got to make it at least 7.5 foot tall. And another thing to think about is how they can jump off. So this is actually on a down slope, so they'd have to jump up even higher to get over this. So 7.5 foot tall is one part of this tip. The other part of this tip is a lot of times you'll see the deer fencing and it doesn't have anything across the top. I think you should always put a visual something across the top so that they see what they have to jump over. Several times the deer has come through these and jumped over the top and simply ripped through this deer fencing on their way out. Not so much in, but on their way out. So to keep this project cheap, to go across the top, we just had a friend who had these old bamboo that they were using, and we used them. You can use tree saplings, you can use old trim pieces, or you can use even old pipe as well. So when it comes to making it so that they can't get over the top, if you leave your verticals long, then you can add any types of extensions to extend it up. This one, on the way out one time, they broke through this end, and so we decided to add this extra foot up here just to make sure that you couldn't jump over it. Another little bonus tip is, if you're building a fence that has fence boards, you only have to build it up about 6 feet, even sometimes 5 feet tall, so that the deer can't see over it. If it's solid and they can't see over it, they won't jump over it because they can't see where they're going to land. Another trick is that, let's say you don't have a cross member that's long enough, you can just zip tie together 2 shorter pieces and then run it across the length of the top of your fencing area. So the next tip is to utilize whatever kind of post you have on site. So we live in wine country, and there's lots of these leftover stakes I can get from people around here, but in a lot of places these are pretty expensive, and so using posts is another option. The other thing is that the stakes the taller you get, the more expensive, so that's why we chose to take these bamboos, or again, you can use any type of wood to extend it up. We've been using the zip ties to attach it. Another thing that you can do if you're not using the stakes is you can use a sapling, and there's another video that I've made of how you treat the base of the sapling so that it will last a long time. You can check that out in the link above. So a trick you can use to save yourself some money is to make your posts farther apart. They're going to be a little bit less stable, but they'll still be pretty stable in the long run. By far your biggest expense and time consumption is setting your posts. So if you're going to set in concrete and use wood, that's going to be the most money and the most time consumptive. So if you're using stakes, and we actually needed to save money on the stakes, and there was some that we just ran out of stakes. So in this case, what I did was I took just an extra piece of bamboo, or like I said, a trim piece, or some saplings off the land, and I just staked it to the bottom. I strapped it to the bottom of our log that we used, and then zip tied it up here to the top, and it's functioning fine to extend and minimize the amount of stakes that we're using. So if you wanted to extend it and make it longer and make it a little more structurally sound, if you add these 45s in, then it'll make it more stable. So the next biggest engineering feat of keeping the deer out of your garden is building your gates. And so whenever possible, always trying to use reclaimed materials. So what we had on site was some leftover half full length but cut in half utility panels and hog panels. I really like using those as gates because you can just put them into the ground, sink them, and then they create their own structure. And then we just added the T-stakes on each side and created a cross member across the top, and you get the benefit of being able to grow beautiful hops or whatever you want across the hog panel. And then we also had a leftover hog panel, which I'm going to keep it open. We had the leftover another piece of hog panel, and then to create hinges, we just added these little hose clamps on there, which are rot resistant and will work really great. So one of the main tips that I would tell you, no matter how you're building your gate, always put a cross member across the top. Because putting a cross member across the top is going to give this structural integrity. I'm sure you've seen the gates where they lean and sag all over people's fences. So there's no reason not to put the cross member on top, as it'll just hold it in one place. And then also, if you want to grow trellises and nice things around it, it makes that an option. The last thing to think about when you're installing your gates is human error. You know, there's going to come a point when you or somebody else forgets to close the gate and the deer just come in. So I'd recommend, I haven't installed this yet, but putting in a self-closing hinge, a spring-loaded hinge on your gate. And then also adding a latch that if you just push it closed, it'll automatically close, like a very common gate latch. So a time-saving tip that really helped me was getting a good quality zip tie. I got these 12-inch, 50-pound break strength, tensile strength zip ties, and I used the 12 inches for most of the stuff that I did. And then I also got these 8-inch, 40-pound break strength zip ties, and use these on the smaller, just zipping chicken wire to deer fencing, or just a really thin wire. But if you get a lower strength or a cheaper zip tie, they break, and then it just takes more time. So get the 50-pound 12-inch as your main zip tie. So here are your bonus tips. So if you've been researching this topic of keeping deer out of your garden, you may have heard of the fishing line. Now, I've seen it go both ways, but that is an option. If you have a 30-pound strength fishing line, and the key would be to have to go all the way to the ground, and so that they'd hit it without trying to go through, without getting their nose underneath it. Frankly, we chose not to go that way because I don't really trust it. Another bonus tip, or like an emergency remedy, if your deer are getting in and you can't seem to close the perimeter, is to make your own deer repellent. I'm just going to read off the list because I don't know it by heart, but the deer repellent is made up of milk, raw eggs, garlic powder, and cayenne pepper, diluted in water, and then you just spray that on, and they really don't like that, supposedly. I haven't tried it myself, but I think it'd be worth a try if you're in an emergency situation. So now the cost breakdown. So how did it work for us? Since we didn't buy any of the cross members, the bamboo, or the stakes, we got all that stuff just harvested around from other people and friends, and we only used as many stakes as we had. So the price for us per foot was $1.89 per foot, and that was with the extra chicken wire that we bought. Now if I were to do it again, and that was at 300 feet, If I were to do it again, I would pay the extra money up front and get a 600-pound break strength deer fence at 7.5 foot tall. Then I wouldn't have to buy the chicken wire, and that would have reduced my cost to $1.17 per foot. Now, if you have to buy the stakes, we're out in California on the West Coast with the stakes and with the deer fencing and the chicken wire, that's $3.32 per foot. So to help you do your research to get the materials collected for your own deer fence, I'll put in the description below the materials and the links to the ones that I bought. If you like this video, I think you'd probably like the next one that's up here listed, and have a great day.